What's up, everybody? Welcome to MicroCAST. As usual, today's episode is hosted by me, TJ David, and Zoe Rome.
We're going to start today's conversation off with our hot or not topics for the week. Then we're going to transition into what we're into, including some movies and TV shows that we've been really thinking about a lot, watching, and recommending to our athletes.
Yeah, awesome. From here, we're going to shift gears. We're going to talk about the time course of adaptations. And this is something that we've talked a little bit about and mentioned in our Training Tip Tuesday Instagram post. So we really wanted to just talk more about that and get into some more of the detail there. So you guys, athletes out there, have an idea of just how long it takes to adapt to specific stimulus. Yeah. Hey, if you're an athlete who's looking for support in your running journey, give us a shout. We'd love to hear from you. We'd also like to answer your questions on this podcast. If you've got topics you're interested in or you have questions, just, let us know. microcosmcoaching@gmail.com. We've actually had several athletes reaching out as a result of this, and that's been pretty neat. So just another shout out to that. Feel free. We're here. We're here for you. Want to get into it?
Yeah. Hot or not, toe socks, TJ. Toe socks.
Not hot.
Not
hot. Not hot.
Okay, tell me why.
It's a personal preference. I just like a regular sock.
Yeah. I go both ways. Sometimes I like
ways.
a regular sock. I will say for long runs and for one of the few things I'm like really not flexible on for race day is I always race in the Injinji 2-layer system. Like anytime I'm racing 50 miles or more, I get the toe sock liner, which is a really thin liner. And then the outer sock. I have really narrow feet. So I find that I get even though I theoretically have plenty of room for my toes to splay inside most shoes, I get really bad blisters between my toes. That tends to be where my feet get messed up the most. So toe socks really has helped me cut down on the friction between my toes.
You get gnarly blisters.
I feel like I don't ever notice them till I'm done running. Like they're not something that stops me when I'm racing or that I think about, but it's one of those things where I'll take my shoe off after a race and it just looks like my sock is full of hamburger meat.
Your feet are gnarly.
And I've got those my toes kind of look like fingers. Not ideal for running.
Well, you seem to do fine at running, so I wouldn't jump to those conclusions. But I am thinking about, you got a 100-miler coming up. You always race in toe socks.
Always.
I never do, and I never get blisters. And I wonder if you switched. You should try something new on race day. You should try a completely new sock combination.
I'm just gonna wear a sock where my toes are all touching for hours and hours. I always start with toe socks, and for hundreds, I always give myself the option because sometimes I have found if my feet really swell, then the little toe sockies start to feel kind of like really tight sausage casings on my toes. So I always think maybe I'll switch out, but even when I have the option, I never have.
Yeah, stick with what works.
Yeah.
If you're not noticing those blisters, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Something's working. We're doing something right.
So you're hot on the toe socks.
I'm hot on the toe socks. Solid Zoe endorsement.
I'm cold on those. I wear whatever socks people want to give me for free. I'm wearing the Lebent wool socks, 3/4 crew for.
They're like a bamboo wool, right?
No, they're merino.
Oh,
for the last.
You don't shave the bamboos down.
No. Yeah, they're from New Zealand, company from New Zealand. Really nice socks. They dry actually really dry quickly when your feet get wet. They're comfortable. I like them. They got some new versions that are little thinner.
What height of sock are you? Is that something you're strict on? Do you have a sock height preference?
Tall sock. I don't trust the person in a low sock, especially a guy in a low sock.
No, there's just something about a man showing all his ankle. I don't know what it makes me I know that socks don't offer any structural or skeletal support, but whenever I see a runner's little ankle bone sticking out, I'm just like, oh, poor little baby ankle bone is just raw and defenseless. There's nothing separating your ankle from the world. You need a thin layer of synthetic fiber between you and the world.
Well, you know when you're like running on a trail and you kick a rock up and then it like knocks you in the
Yeah, yeah,
ankle?
yeah, yeah.
That's why you wear the tall
That's why
sock.
I like a mini crew myself,
Mini
just
crew.
above the ankle.
Yeah, that's a good sock for you.
Yeah. It's my best tan line that I have currently.
Well, I have a permanent tall sock tan
Mhm.
for about the
Well,
last 12
that's
years.
also because you straight up like will be going out on the town as we so often do, and you'll be wearing the TJ tuxedo is like jorts, tall socks, and Birkenstock sandals.
Gotta keep those feet happy. I'm a runner. I got long-term goals and dreams. I don't want to mess with those feet. Extra cushion. It's helpful.
I just think it's so like it could be like the hottest day of the summer and you're wearing like black socks with sandals around town.
It's my Vermont dad vibes.
Yeah, you look like a Vermont dad for sure.
Woodstock.
Yeah.
All right. Let's shift the conversation from me back to you. Hot topic, hot or not, carbon shoes.
I mean, hot, but it's kind of one of those things where, a lot of what makes a carbon plate work in a shoe is the combination of the plate itself with like a supercritical foam. Usually that's like a PBAX based EVA sort of foam, or a PBAX based foam versus pure EVA. And so that's where you get a lot of the like really nice bounce and propulsion. I also feel that like when I run easy in carbon, I can recover better because it's so like it really absorbs shock as well. However, there are some studies that are really showing that the rigidity and the fact that it's sort of like the instability that's inherent in a super bouncy shoe can cause a lot of lower leg issues. So with athletes that tend to wear carbon shoes too much, so our recommendation is like carbon shoes, great for speed workouts, great for races, great for a few key long runs, but not your daily driver, right? And we're seeing that people that are wearing carbon shoes more often than not have a higher instance of lower leg sort of injuries. So
Yeah,
that's
I've seen
my
that.
that's my lukewarm caveat laden answer.
I don't have a ton of athletes currently rocking carbon. But you know that the stiffness of the carbon can impact the lower legs. And so
Yeah. So we see like an increase of plantar issues and Achilles issues, calf issues.
I'm still gonna go hot.
Yeah.
Because I think if you've got a good, like the new Nike Trail shoe, I've
So
got
sick.
a run in
Yeah.
on those, and I was like, wow, these are the foam especially
Yeah.
so comfortable. Just really nice, both the uphill, the flats, and I thought in the down was okay, a little stiff on the down, but I felt like they were better in technical than the North Face.
Yeah. Just because I feel like they have a little bit like the North Face kind of feels like running in an out of control bouncy castle sometimes. Like it doesn't always feel like you can really control where the energy gets directed. And I feel like in the Nike Zoom Ultrafly, it feels like the plane of motion's a bit more limited to like a normal forward stride.
Yeah, it's a fun shoe.
Yeah.
I'm feeling hot on that shoe right now. I might use it again tomorrow.
Nice.
Okay, out and backs, hot or not?
I like an out and back. I like not having to think and make any navigational decisions. I like if you're like, all right, I'm running 10 miles today. You hit 5 miles, you turn around. There's no decisions. There's no nothing. I think that if you're always relying on like the epicness or the aesthetics of your running route or a line to keep you entertained, that's a problem. So I'm always a fan of embracing like whatever feels boring and grindy.
Well, that's because you have strong intrinsic motivation.
Yeah. And I'm like real bad at navigating, and I'm also real bad at math. So like the other week I was training for Run Rabbit with my friend Corinne, and I was like, I found this awesome route. It's going to be like maybe 23, 24 miles at the most. And it was like 29 and a half. I am not good at trail math.
You're not good at Gaia.
I'm not good at Gaia.
I like out and backs. Yeah. I kind of don't have a preference either way, to be completely honest. I'm hot for it if people like it.
Yeah. What do you think about Leadville being an out and back, like for a 100-mile race?
I thought it was obnoxious on the descent down Hope Pass.
Because you're like, I'm going to be
too many people moving slow that I was trying to get around, and there's just nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So that was tough. But I really enjoyed the aspect of like all the support that I got to give to people and then that they were giving to me. And that was kind of fun and uplifting, and I
Mhm.
enjoyed that. Um, I I don't know. I could have gone either way. Like if you had
Yeah.
removed all those people from the situation and they weren't part of the out and back, I would have still enjoyed it probably just as much because I don't mind the time. I don't need that stimulus
Yeah.
necessarily, although it was nice.
Yeah.
But I would say the people dodging, it was a little hectic on the
Mhm.
other side going back towards Twin Lakes. And I was kind of like, you get over it really quickly. It's just such a small section of the course, but
Yeah.
everyone is right there. We're talking about hundreds of runners.
Yeah.
Um, so that was interesting, but I still think it was pretty hot. I'm gonna
Yeah.
accentuate the positives on that.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, being a brand ambassador, hot or not?
I'm going to give this one a big thumbs down.
Thumb-
I feel like being a brand ambassador, you're just, I'm going to speak frankly here. I think you're being capitalism's bitch in a big way here. You are literally rendering unpaid labor for a company. Like you are paying to advertise their goods, right? Because typically the way brand ambassadorships work is you get a discount on goods with the promise that you'll like use your social networks to advertise them on the back end. These companies could totally afford to give you shit for free. They could totally afford to pay you for advertising if they wanted to. They don't want to. They want to continue to take advantage of you. I am not a fan of people being brand ambassadors. I understand that like being associated with a brand, particularly in the sport of trail running right now, confers a level of prestige that can make people feel comfortable or can make them feel a part of the community. I would urge people to just take a good hard look at like, okay, how much work am I doing for this company? How much do they actually value me? And how do I value myself? And where might there be a misalignment there?
I agree. I'm just not hot at all on
Yeah.
brand ambassadorship. I think it's a way for the market and individual brands to just take advantage of free
Yeah.
labor from people.
Yeah, like you're supposed to feel special because you get a discount on like lube or whatever and post about it to your, dozens of social fan. Like I just think it's a bad system that I think undermines the whole market. It makes people devalue themselves and it allows brands to just like take advantage of otherwise a well-intentioned and close-knit community. I'm not here to yuck anyone's yum if you are a brand
Yeah,
ambassador, but again, I would just think long and hard about how much unpaid work you're doing and is it worth it?
totally. And I think that there are pros and cons, and you do at times have to weigh kind of some of that, right? Like, if I'm an athlete who's, aspiring to be a national level elite and I have to now start traveling to different competitions. And so that means leaving Colorado and maybe racing in Arizona or California. That's expensive. So, like,
Yeah.
any way you can save costs, you're going to be willing to go on Instagram and spread the word about a brand because they're, maybe giving you a free pair of shoes, and like a $250 pair of like carbon Nikes is a couple tanks of gas, and that does make a difference for some people. And I know, I've have a lot of experience. I'm a former professional athlete and I understand the value of those relationships in a dollar from both
Mm-hmm.
perspectives.
Have you ever been a brand ambassador?
Totally. I mean, that's how I started. That's how I got my foot in the door and later became a paid professional.
So, do you think it's a decent intermediary step for athletes who are looking to be professionals, or would you say, nah, dog, hold out until you can get that real paycheck?
That's a hot take. I think it depends on what the deal is.
Mm,
And I would love to mentor and have athletes in that situation, because if it's a bad deal,
yeah, yeah,
if it's going to take away from your ability to train because you have to give up mental and emotional bandwidth to do all
yeah,
these posts, if it's not something that feels in alignment with your values, don't go for it.
yeah, yeah.
That would be my recommendation, because that can lead to burnout and really impact your training and then your racing
Yeah, and
quality.
you've helped like pro and elite athletes that we work with, you've helped them navigate some of these decisions as they start to step into that territory too.
Totally. It's super fun because I have,
I feel
over
like
a
you've been on
decade of
both sides of
yeah,
it. Yeah.
for over a decade. Like, that's a long time. I've negotiated a lot of my own contracts and would have loved to have had, help with that, and someone being like, "Hey, this doesn't really fit your values.
Yeah.
Look what you have to do in order to get this." Like, that brand is, taking advantage of your
Yeah.
time. They don't understand what like real athletic labor is.
Yeah.
There's like a strong misunderstanding of like, hey, professional athletics, that is labor.
Yeah.
And that labor should be compensated for. So it's like, is posting on Instagram or, is that labor? Yeah, that's definitely labor.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that labor should come with a fee, not with a pair of shoes. A pair of
Yeah.
shoes
I
doesn't
mean, a
pay
pair of
bills.
shoes, like, even in the best case scenario, like, we've seen athletes accept, like, I mean, I think I'm curious if your DMs look anything like mine, but, I'm always having like weird little startup brands, particularly in the age of like direct to consumer marketing, slide into my DMs and be like, hey, we would love to send you product if you'll post about it. I've gotten things like cricket based protein shakes, which, like, hard pass. One of my favorite ones was a yoga apparel brand where you get to put different crystals, like you can put them like in the bra of the stuff that they send so that your chakras can be more in line, I think. It's really, I don't know, some of these things have really just gotten out of hand, but a lot of these companies, because they're not really willing to truly invest in like advertising, they're just relying on tapping into other people's social networks and, again, unpaid labor to do that.
Totally. And I think you have to say like, what are my goals? What am I looking to achieve? How does this serve where I'm trying to go? And, am I willing to do these things? Some of these brands ask for ridiculous
Mm-hmm.
amounts of deliverables. Are you an athlete or are you a photographer, a writer, a content creator? Those are three
Yeah.
separate
A content
jobs.
strategist.
Right. Those are 4 jobs now
Yeah.
that we just listed that are apparently expectations of
And none
an
of them
athlete.
make you faster or fitter, unfortunately.
I would argue that they make you a worse athlete.
Yeah, I would agree.
So I'm super cold on this. And if anybody out there has questions, feel free to reach out to me.
And if you want some cricket protein, feel free to use the discount code Zoe420.
It's a major red flag if a brand is DMing you.
Yeah, do not. Yeah, right. Yeah, if your brand marketing is exactly like a horny teenager, like, not a good strategy.
Go with a different brand.
Run, don't walk.
All right. Oh man, I could take that topic and run with it for an hour,
Yeah.
but we better not. But that was a good warm up for me. All right, we're into some TV shows. Well, a TV show
So
right
you're
now.
recovering from a 100-mile race.
Yeah.
I'm tapering for a 100-mile race, which means that we are getting some really high volume TV watching in, which I've been loving.
I find my best recovery happens on the couch.
Yeah. I mean, you really like TV. I really love movies. We love spending time on the couch. Yeah, what's your favorite thing that you've seen recently?
Well, I really wanted to talk about, we finally finished The Bear.
Oh my gosh.
The recent season,
Yeah.
season 2. We finally had time to watch the last 2 episodes.
Yeah.
And I mean, not only is this one of my favorite shows on TV at the moment, and it kind of like, for me, connects me back to all my years working in the restaurant industry, and I can kind of just relate a lot to the characters, but I'm like, oh man, like the arc of some of the characters in this past season finding their purpose and really like pushing for their dreams. I just thought it was like just so well done.
Yeah, I think it's one of those rare examples of, like, or maybe not so rare in the world of prestige TV, but the second season I feel was even better than the first, because in the first you kind of got this like ensemble look at how all these characters relate to each other, but in season 2 you get to really pursue individual storylines and dive deep into sort of the backstories and the futures of these folks that work at the Bear restaurant. I particularly liked the storylines of Richie, what's the pastry chef's name? Marcus. As they do something in the restaurant industry known as staging, where you go and you work for free at a different like a really high-end restaurant, kind of like an internship.
Right.
And I really love that, like, I mean, I feel like The Bear almost watches like a sports TV show, because the editing is so fast paced. There's so many like really dynamic camera shots, and you really get this sort of like heart pumping feeling of what it feels like to be pushed in the service industry. I'm curious, what about this season stood out to you, TJ?
Yeah, I mean, obviously those 2 stories, particularly Richie's like story arc, was just amazing because he clearly at the beginning of the season was just like struggling to find his purpose, develop, I guess, relating this back in a microcosm sort of way to athletics, like finding his why. Like
Yeah.
he kind of was like kind of like out to sea and
Mhm.
didn't needed to find his mooring or something. Like he just wasn't grounded. He
Yeah.
didn't and he I think he had a part of the season he reflected many times, externalized, I don't have a purpose.
Mm.
And then he went to stage at a restaurant. I don't know if it's a real restaurant or fictionalized or whatever. But they really put him through the ringer,
Yeah.
and they kind of taught him some core principles in mastery,
Yeah.
like starting with polishing the forks, and like that was his sole job. And like although like I think he only had a week there at the actual restaurant, it the way that they did that episode, it felt like he was there for several months, because
Yeah.
that's almost like really the way that this process actually works in real life,
Right.
where you might not be staging for a month, but you also might be.
Yeah.
But you're really gonna start at the bottom, and you're gonna like have to show that like not only are you great at polishing forks, but like you're gonna understand the reason why you polish those forks, and they
Right.
don't have water stains on them when you
Yeah.
present them to the guests. And like when you have demonstrated that understanding, not an intellectual understanding, but you embody that understanding,
Right.
then you move on to the next part of the job. And
Right.
eventually, if you're lucky, you
Yeah.
get to be out on the floor actually being a server with the guests and learning how to be a maitre d' or a front of the house manager, whatever the exact role is, or they call it, I don't know, on the show. But that was kind of where he went. He kind of started with the forks, and then he put the work in, had to really do a lot of internal work to recognize like where his biases were, where he was self-limiting himself. And then he really came out of that like a totally changed person.
Yeah.
Like he found his drive and his motivation in the process of like cultivating an amazing experience for guests in the restaurant.
Right. And I feel like that's such a good metaphor for the running training process as well, right? Like there are so many things that are foundational that maybe seem really detail oriented. Like it feels like you're just polishing forks. And why does that matter? Well, it matters because the lesson was always that you have to always be engaged in improving the fundamentals. You can never let your ego outgrow the attachment to the fundamentals and of mastering even the things that feel really small, like the easy runs, right? Like the super, zone 1, zone 2, like aerobic base building. If you're not willing to dismantle your ego and engage in that maybe like less sexy, not super Strava worthy side of training, then like you're never going to make it to the front of the house.
Totally. I mean, like, what is the daily run around the neighborhood but polishing forks?
Polishing forks.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's why it was just so fun and interesting to watch, because all the things we do as runners, they reflect back to us some of the things we do and we don't do in other parts of our lives.
Yeah.
And so when we learn to polish the forks through the process of running, where else can we bring that?
Yeah. And I also really loved that in Richie's story, particularly, he started as someone who was really disengaged from the team, really disengaged and like actively resistant, and kind of held the team back because he just, maybe his ego, he kind of let his ego run away with him occasionally. And he felt like he was too good to engage in some of the seemingly menial tasks that are required of running a restaurant. But in like really working at this high level restaurant, you could just kind of see like everything click in his brain, of like everything down to like, again, the fork polishing and the every second counts mentality. It all clicked for him, and he suddenly was able to re-engage with the process. And I really like that, because he wasn't just born the world's best maitre d' or like the world's best front of house manager. He kind of needed to learn and grow at his own pace and be forced into the circumstances that helped him integrate and like viscerally understand all of that information.
And it was a really non-linear process, like in the first season, he was like selling drugs.
Yeah.
He brought a gun to work.
Yeah.
Like he was totally kind of like, I don't know, maybe more of like a bad boy personality, persona type, and just a lot of friction with everybody. And it was so interesting to see him like kind of come into his purpose.
Yeah. And I think, again, like another thing that really reminded me of like how this relates to training is him feeling engaged and connected at work had profound ripple effects in his personal life as well. Like in the final, like the way he started showing up as a father and a partner, like even though his former wife and the mother of his child got engaged to a new guy, through the radical transformation of him becoming really engaged in the pursuit of mastery, he was able to support his former partner. He was more engaged as a father. And in the, not to spoil it, but in the final episode, he was able to like hold Carmi accountable to excellence in his own way. And he was able to sort of access new sort of emotional valences that he wasn't able to tap into formerly in the season.
Yeah, that was so that was so awesome. Like
Yeah.
it felt also, I think in the show they just do a really good job of making it feel very real
Yeah.
with the dialogue and the emotions and
Again, the editing is
yeah, it's just
phenomenal.
excellent. It's so good. For me, there's always this nostalgia where I sometimes I'm like, oh, I miss just the team atmosphere of working in the restaurants and all of the challenges and things. And
I'm
I kind of get to relive a little of
Yeah,
that
I'm
there.
curious what your background in the service industry has taught you about coaching or about being an athlete.
I think it's given me the interpersonal skills that have really allowed me to excel and
Mm.
become an excellent coach.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's the foundation of a coach athlete relationship. So it's communication, creating spaces that feel open, honest, where there are few barriers to
Mm.
communication. Because the key with the coach athlete relationship is one, and we'll talk later maybe about this in our timelines part of the podcast, but having the time to develop the relationship. A relationship isn't something that's built over one or two interactions in a training log or a couple of deep dives or calls that you might do with an athlete. It's built over dozens and then hundreds of those interactions. And ideally, you continue to build and build and build on that relationship. And like the show really does a good job of presenting, how important that is. And especially in the relationship between Carmi and Sydney and how important that functional working relationship is for them. They kind
Yeah.
of have like a coach athlete relationship in many ways. He's her coach because he's the experienced award winning chef. She's the talent that's coming up. She's looking for him for guidance, but it's also this two-way street, right?
Right.
Where you both have to have fully bought into the process. And that takes both of them, it took time, right? And that's
Yeah.
very representative of like how a coach athlete relationship is formed. Like the coach at first is like, I'm not sure about your commitment level. And the athletes at first, like, I don't know if like the advice you're giving me actually works because I haven't tried this for long
Yeah.
enough. And like, or maybe I've never worked with a coach before. So I don't know, like, am I coachable or not? How does that look? And like over time, it's a two-way street. So you both contribute to the common good, which is creating the overall space and situation where the athlete can succeed and realize performance gains, and the coach can also feel good about what they're doing. Because I don't coach for any other reason that it makes me feel good, and
Yeah.
so that's an important outcome for me of these relationships. So I think one, gratitude is a big part of this. You can see that in the show where these characters develop a gratitude for the relationships that they cultivate, and then they have their own ways of expressing that. But
Yeah.
it's really important to express those things, and I think like that's something that I've really learned through working in the service industry for so long, is those relationships and kind of that interplay between different people. And if we look at that through the lens of coach athlete, I mean, it's a fairly complicated relationship that involves multiple different dynamics.
Yeah.
And so you have to give that time to grow.
Yeah. And for listeners who don't know, I mean, the background and the context here is that you worked in the service industry for many years, and Aspen, like in the most like upscale sort of high end Michelin star type restaurants.
Yeah, I did.
So yeah, you had to bring your A game every night.
Excelling in all areas.
And you used to really like feel like, I remember you always used to like pack yourself like potatoes and like readily available carbohydrates to fuel your nights on the floor.
Especially as that training volume picked up.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I would like.
Did you ever Strava a night?
Yeah, busy night at Matsuhisa, which is a Nobu restaurant where I finished out my last 3+ years before microcosm really picked up, and I was able to go full time. On a really busy night, I would easily walk 6 miles.
Wow.
Yeah.
Zone 1 with strides.
Depends on how the nervous system's doing.
Should have worn a heart rate monitor.
Too much data. Too much data. All right. Let's talk a little bit about. Okay, last weekend we had an epic movie watching weekend.
Epic, every night a doubleheader.
Total recovery weekend, just like settling in
between 4 and 6 hours of movies a day.
Optimal.
Yeah,
I loved it. And my favorite movie of the weekend was La La Land, which I had never seen before. And it's a movie about a jazz pianist and an actress. And I, again, kind of playing off this topic of relationships that's kind of come out of the conversation from The Bear, which we recommend to everybody. The interplay and relationship between Sebastian and I think it's Mia.
Yes.
Was so interesting to me in that they were both catalysts for each other's growth and achieving their dreams. And I think that this, again, was just, to me, it was like a microcosm of just like how important the people we surround ourselves with and the standards they help hold us accountable to are so vital in whether we achieve our biggest dreams or if we revert to smaller thinking or small vision syndrome or something like that.
Totally. I love La La Land. It's definitely, I think I had avoided it for many years, just because of the whole like Oscar Moonlight debacle sort of situation, and because it's a musical, which is just like not 100% my jam. But it's written and directed by Damien Chazelle, who's one of my favorite writers and directors. He directed Whiplash, which incredible movie, and Babylon, also an incredible movie.
Yeah, those are two favorites of mine too.
I mean, and I feel like a through line that kind of goes through all of his work is this feeling of like giving into obsession and chasing mastery in all things. Like the common like sort of narrative thread that connects all of these films is you have a protagonist who's really connected to a dream and is going to chase it to their own and maybe others' detriment. And I feel like one thing I really liked about La La Land is that the protagonists are able to chase their dreams without, like sort of giving into the dark side of obsession as explored in his other films like Whiplash and Babylon. And I think it's so poignant to look at the ways that like other people can create the circumstances for us to achieve and chase our dream. And like I feel like dream chasing and like doesn't always need to be sort of conflated with achievement. Like it doesn't mean like getting the promotion, winning the race, like getting the job, like whatever it is. It can be creating the thing that you know that you're the only person that can create, right? Like it can be something like really beautiful and generative, sort of separate from these like capitalist understandings of achievement and success. And which I think in La La Land it really was, right? Like Sebastian's dream was to open a jazz club. It wasn't to be a famous musician. It wasn't to be the greatest of all time. It was to create a generative space for other like-minded musicians to come and celebrate jazz together and to sort of like give other people the opportunity to enjoy the musical form that he loves so much. For Mia, she was really interested in a more like connective form of theater than she had seen explored in LA. And their relationship allows them both to explore that in a way that they hadn't ever felt maybe supported or compelled to explore before, because they just needed that other sort of outside perspective to shore up their own sense of self-belief in their passions and in their dreams.
Well, I think that again represented to me, I'll put my coaching cap back on, but the coach athlete relationship, in the fact that, athletes are often trapped in this, what I like to now call a small vision syndrome, where they just are stuck thinking, I'm not an athlete. I'm not going to ever run a 5K. I'm never going to be fast. Like they all have these stories and then they uphold them because they're so focused on them. Everything they do, they see reason to uphold the story in that. And they're really locked in. And then when you come into a coach athlete relationship, and ideally, you're working with a coach who is going to be willing to serve you and not please you, and they're going to give you an opposite perspective. You're capable of more, and you need to start creating a vision for where your ceiling really is, because we often, as as the movie showed us, there was a time where Mia, she put herself out there. She decided to do a one lady play, and nobody came.
One lady play. That's such a fun one woman show.
show, you know, whatever. I don't know
No,
the
I like that.
proper
I feel
terminology.
like I want to start a band called One Lady Play.
That is a good name for a band. The one lady play, and she immediately was, the outcome wasn't what she expected. She felt her performance was bad, and then she overheard not many people showed up, and then
Yeah.
she overheard somebody in the audience like saying, "Oh, that was, I hope she doesn't quit her day job, like that sucked."
Yeah.
And she just couldn't handle another setback, so she kind of quit, and she moved back home, and it was a really pivotal moment for her, because Sebastian, who is kind of her boyfriend during this period, he wasn't there. He missed it. She didn't have kind of that support. She went home, and actually, the silver lining in that was somebody in
a casting director.
Right, was in the audience. One of the few people in the audience was actually a casting director and saw something in her, and she quit. And so then, that casting director ended up contacting Sebastian and then he went and found her and got her to go to the casting that ended up being the pivotal moment that launched her acting career, where she was able to achieve her acting dreams and become a kind of a star.
Yeah.
And what kind of really, I think, was important there was then Sebastian really kind of playing, I would say, a coaching role in that situation, held her accountable to her dreams and not giving up, because she didn't want to go to the casting because she thought it would result in the same result she had before, which is like, I'm not going to get this role. They're going to laugh at me. I suck. And, he was like, you have to go. Like, this is your dream. Everything you do has to serve that dream, no matter what.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if it's painful. Doesn't matter if the evidence can sometimes be contrary to what you think you need to get there. Because this, again, the silver lining in the whole thing was she thought she sucked, and the casting director was one of the few people in the audience and loved it.
Yeah.
So, when we have these people in our lives that can keep us accountable to our dreams and say, here's your ceiling. Like, I see something in you, and it's up to you to do something about that. But I'm not going to let you get away with saying you're not good enough. I'm not going to let you get away with small vision syndrome. You need to rise up and start to believe this is where my ceiling is. Because if like, hey, my ceiling's up there, that's what I'm going for, I'm much more likely to end up there. But if I'm like, I'm probably not good enough, I can't run more than 20 minutes right now, how can I do a 5K? I'll never do a 5K. Well, guess what? That line of thinking, you're never going to do the 5K.
Yeah.
So I think that was represented to me really strongly throughout the movie. Also, the storyline was awesome, and I really just enjoyed it. But
oh man, I mean, I saw it and I immediately texted you. It was like, you've got to watch this, and you didn't, so I had to make you, because I knew you would like it too. And I think I really like thinking about La La Land and comparing and contrasting it with Whiplash, Damien Chazelle's film before La La Land, which is about a really tough love musician instructor who is just like pretty awful to his students, but pushes them really, really hard. And ultimately, I think it's left up in the air if Miles Teller like actually achieves his potential as a musician. We see him have one great performance at the end of the movie, but I feel like the narrative kind of leads you to believe like that might be it for him, and he like reaches his ceiling maybe a little bit early, still very much as a young man, when especially in something like music, like a lot of the people that are truly great are in their like are like octogenarians, have been doing it for decades
to get good.
And I think that seeing that tough love approach compared and contrasted with like the true love approach of La La Land, and having someone who knows you and loves you push you from that loving place, I think that, I mean, the story sort of speaks for itself. And I think that it's a really interesting exploration of like, who is best set up to help us reach our potential? Is it the like mean drill sergeant style coach, or is it someone that sees you for who you are and knows what your potential is and gently, lovingly holds you accountable to that?
and I would say at times it wasn't that gentle, but it definitely
Yeah,
wasn't the
but it was
drill
from a place
sergeant.
of love. Yeah,
That's
it
right.
wasn't the J.K. Simmons like throwing a drum set at your head.
Yeah, well, he was, projecting his own insecurity of not
Yeah,
feeling enough as a
never having
musician.
achieved what
Exactly.
he thought he could push others to achieve, right?
Yeah.
And I think that those are, if I could assign a film curriculum to our athletes, it would be to watch to cancel all your plans this weekend and watch the Damien Chazelle, I'm going to call it the Obsession trilogy of Whiplash, La La Land, and Babylon.
Those are three excellent movies.
Three excellent movies made by someone, he's really young. He's one of the youngest directors, like achieving at the level he's achieving in Hollywood. And again, I just think like I teared up when we were watching La La Land because of that really emotional scene when Emma Stone goes home and Ryan Gosling, bless him, in his amazing suits, bless his tailor in this film, truly an Oscar for that woman or man. And he's trying to convince her not to quit, and she's like, what if I don't have it, what if it hurts too much? And those are all things that I've said and felt not that long ago. And I think that the people who really achieve greatness are the people who are just willing to sit in those questions the longest.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I see this on a day to day, with athletes, and the ones who, aren't willing to do that, they really have short careers because what we've learned from life and our own experiences, the experiences of working with other people and reading up on a lot of this. And now, we get to pick some really great movies that kind of like can paint those pictures for us in a fun narrative sense. But, if you're not able to work through challenge, if you give up in the face of adversity, that's when you rob yourself of the most important gifts. And I'm not saying that the shit isn't hard, and it does suck. And I totally get it and have also been there many more times than I like to remember because it sucks. But that's where you learn the most about yourself. And often breakthroughs come as the result of getting through
Yeah.
those times. And I think that was, clearly represented in both The Bear and La La Land. You just have to keep moving forward and through that uncertainty and through sometimes evidence that tells you, hey, maybe you don't have it.
Yeah. And the only time you truly fail is when you stop being curious about your own potential.
I think I want to transition into this conversation about timelines because
a good transition,
because so much of this stuff again is happening over large timelines. The mastery approach that we've been talking about, that we've seen, all of the characters we've mentioned start to adopt, are things that take place over years.
Yeah.
And we've been talking a lot on this podcast that larger time scales are really important in kind of understanding the overall architecture of training and how adaptation actually works. And so, we also, want to make sure people know that at the same time, adaptation does happen quickly too.
Yeah.
And so, you don't have to plug away for years and years to like finally feel like a run is going to feel good. So we wanted to, give a little more context on some of these adaptations, how they work, what we're aiming for in training. And this is just going to be, broad stroke stuff that's going to be really relevant to athletes of all levels. And I'll give a shout out to Coach Cliff Pittman, who is a friend of ours and works over at CTS, who wrote a wonderful article on Trail Runner.
Yeah,
on this
definitely
topic.
Give Cliff a follow. He's the best.
He's a great coach, and definitely like around the same time that we were posting about this on Instagram, he was kind of writing this article. And I think I definitely took a lot of thoughts from his article and included them in this podcast because they're so relevant and succinct and simple and easy to understand.
Before we get too deep in the meat of it here, I wonder if we could zoom out and talk about like what are the pitfalls or the red flags or the distractions that you as a coach see prevent athletes from seeing the big picture here.
Oh man, I almost want to like pause on that because I feel like if we hit that too hard right now, some of these talk about adaptations might.
Is it too big a spoiler?
Yeah,
So we're gonna
because
spoil
uh,
all of season 2 of The Bear for people, but we're not gonna
okay,
spoil aerobic
all right,
timelines.
I'll meet you halfway. I'll meet you
Great.
halfway. I think the biggest issue with this is around goal setting. That's where I
Mm,
see the
hmm.
biggest issue with this for athletes. It's um over not having the self-awareness to realize exactly where you are in the process, and then setting a goal that is way out of line
Yeah.
with your actual experience level and with the underlying physiology that you have.
Right.
And so that's where I see the biggest mistakes made. And where I see the athletes get off track in this process because they set a goal that's too big, and athletes, trail runners, tend to be more mentally resilient than I think most laymen.
Then the gin pop.
Yeah, and so they can kind of get away with it to a certain point, and but then they're ending up cashing checks that they really don't have the money in the savings account. They don't have the structural adaptations, the musculoskeletal adaptations to actually support that work.
Okay, great. So your aerobic system is cashing checks that your body and I mean that your muscles and bones just aren't ready to follow through on.
That's right. And like I think if we start this conversation off with just one thing in mind, the aerobic system develops much quicker than the musculoskeletal system. So
Yeah.
that means your heart, your mitochondria, your capillary beds, all this stuff that we'll kind of talk a little bit about in the next couple minutes, that improves quicker than say your joints, your tendons, your connective tissues,
Right.
much quicker.
Which is like why overuse injuries happen, right? Is because your brain and your lungs and your heart are saying go, 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 but your quads are like, hold up, bud. Your IT band is like, oh boy, your quads are gonna be there. It's the software might feel like it's good to go, but the hardware needs a second to catch up.
That's right. And I think athletes don't understand that. They think both of those things happen at the same rate and in a linear
Yeah.
fashion, and it's just not true, which leads to a lot of time off, a lot of injury, a lot of expensive,
Yeah.
medical bills.
You're running like OS X Sierra on an old ass Mac laptop.
I'm not that technical, but I get what you're saying. I'm thinking like it's Windows 95.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect. So let's talk about the adaptation, like the first things to adapt. So thinking on the timeline of like 1 to 4 weeks when athletes just start really training in a structured way, what are the first sort of adaptations that we're going to see on a physiological level?
So I want to preface this with the fact that it only works if you're training consistently.
So more than one run a week.
Yes. I would say for a newer runner, that looks like 3 to 5 runs a week. And if you're on the side of 3, that means probably 2 cross training sessions on the bike or the elliptical where you're working zone 2 or below. So very easy effort. And that really is kind of the catalyst for these adaptations. So what happens in that first period, we call them early adaptations, is basically we have an increased cardiovascular efficiency, improved blood flow. There's improved neuromuscular function, so like smoother running. And essentially, like this period is all about kind of like laying the foundation for everything else. Because without this, you can't have the intermediate and the advanced adaptations that occur later on in training. And so, again, like just zooming in a little bit on the physiology there, like what's actually happening when you're training consistently at a low heart rate is your over time, your cardiac stroke volume, or for example, like the amount of blood per beat that your heart can pump, that's going to improve.
Mm,
And so that's also going to lower your resting heart rate. So your heart doesn't need to beat as much to create the same amount of blood that ends up going to your working muscles, transporting oxygen and nutrients around to help fuel your exercise. It can do that by keeping the heart rate lower because it's producing much more blood per beat. And that's a
right.
really, really important adaptation. The other important adaptation here is angiogenesis. That's just a technical term for uh, meaning that your capillaries, the little veins that kind of run all over your body and that connect your arteries and your bigger veins to your heart and to your muscles, those capillaries grow in density, which means you're much more efficient. You can become more efficient at transporting the oxygen and nutrients because your veins and arteries don't actually do that. They have separate functions from that. The capillaries are really what is involved in the process of bringing oxygen to and from your muscles and nutrients to and from your muscles.
When we retire from coaching, I want us to open an Irish pub for endurance athletes called Angiogenesis.
It's a great name.
Yeah.
I love that name.
It's like if I did drag, that would be my name.
Awesome.
And I would have the densest capillary beds. But again, I think it's really cool to note that, again, a lot of these changes are really cool, but where we run into trouble is when athletes, are capitalizing on the fact that they've gotten really fit. They have this aerobic base, but their bones and their muscles, like the structure of their very body, isn't quite ready to support what their aerobic and cardiovascular systems are able to do at this point.
That's right. And so, something that we always recommend athletes, and a big thing, an issue we see here is you start to realize these benefits pretty quickly. 1 to 4 weeks, these adaptations start to form. And so you can start to have the sensations of runs feeling better and less hard, especially with the neuromuscular adaptations. The more frequently you run, the smoother running is going to feel. So you're reinforcing those the biomechanics and those patterns in your brain. And then eventually it becomes more like second nature. But I really want athletes to recognize that this is a product of consistency. Consistency is king. All of our standards, everything we do has to serve and support consistency. And if we're not doing that, we're not going to achieve these adaptations. So something related that is really important, especially for newer athletes, is we have to replace the idea that you need to be motivated every day to get out to stay consistent with I would call like a habits driven mindset, where the habits determine our actions and the actions you take regularly support your training, and that training supports the adaptations that I just talked about. So small steps every day are the way to reduce barriers to consistency. And not, you don't want to increase volume quickly. It becomes hard to maintain that. You want to do small bouts each day. This is especially important for athletes who only, have very little experience or only a couple years of experience.
Right. So let's talk about some of these intermediate adaptations. So things that take maybe 4 to 8 weeks to really improve, like energy utilization, which goes hand in hand, kind of piggybacking on those sort of 1 to 4 week sort of adaptations that happen early on in the training process. So walk me through what's happening 4 to 8 weeks in to specific, consistent, focused, intentional training, right? Like so many caveats there, because like this stuff's not going to happen if you're just like hopping on the Peloton for 20 minutes at a time to do whatever Robin wants you to do, which like awesome, great, love that. But these things come like particularly with the with the zone 1, zone 2 type aerobic consistent training.
That's correct. And if you're working with a coach, obviously you're going to be doing workouts that specifically target these adaptations. And another product kind of the easy running and just beginning to kind of stack and layer those bricks is mitochondrial biogenesis, which is another one of our genesises that
So I'm angio and you're bio.
Sure, perfect. Call me bio. And this is just basically a process where your cells start to produce more mitochondria. And mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
So they're like, oh shit, we need more power.
Right. And we
must construct additional pylons.
Exactly, because they're this is really integral in just energy production. And also, enzymes that contribute to that process here are actually going to become more active as well. And so both of these things in tandem, combined with the stuff we talked about earlier, angiogenesis, consistent running, the neuromuscular adaptations, the improved cardiac stroke volume, all of that is going to lead to more efficiency out there. And then this can start to help with better fat utilization at lower intensities. It's going to help with glycogen uptake, and you're just going to start to really feel better in your runs when you've started to kind of like reach this stage.
Right. And that's why a lot of the science out there, especially like in the bro endurance community about like low carb, high fat, in order to make your body more efficient at fat burning is kind of bunk, because just by nature of running at low intensities, your body gets better at fat burning, right? And so typically pursuing those marginal gains, especially at the risk of like low energy intake, not something that any coach in the space should be recommending, not backed by the evidence.
Absolutely. Yeah. No coach with any accreditation would be saying that.
Yeah. That's just, a lot of times we see athletes who are trying to like, again, play at the margins while neglecting the foundations. And again, like your body's going to get good at doing the stuff that it needs to do. Rarely, if ever, is it a good strategy to like trick or hack the body into doing something it wasn't designed to do. Almost
Well,
always, like the evidence points towards working with your body, working with how the systems work, not against it.
I will say once we talk about this last phase of the adaptation process and we move on to structural adaptation, the body kind of has a safeguard against that.
Yeah.
It will just break down if you're shortcutting.
Ooh, yeah. Body does not like shortcuts. So let's talk about, we're going to call this like the advanced stage, right? Understanding that most athletes train far beyond this advanced stage. But we're thinking like 8 to 12 weeks here. So reduced fatigue during longer efforts. And that usually comes with like more positive sensations on runs and indicators like better recovery. And this is really the point in training where we start to see athletes say things like, I'm recovering better, or my easy runs feel easier, or I'm able to run at the same pace, more sustainably, more with less effort. So can you walk me through sort of in this 8 to 12 week period of, again, structured, healthy, consistent training, what's going on physiologically in the body?
Your body's ability to lactate shuttle is really what's improving here.
So okay, for the folks at home, so often we hear lactic acid. Can you just like, let's break it down for folks? I feel like that's a big misconception we see as coaches all the time, as people are like, my muscles hurt, I must have a lot of lactic acid. That's not a thing.
No, and I don't want to go down this pitfall because it'll take too much. Not a pitfall.
You don't want to get into the nuances of lactic shuttling.
It'll just take too much time because there is such a common misunderstanding there, and athletes, should, and I would encourage them to look it up and
do a
read
quick
on
Goog.
it. But lactate is an energy source.
Yeah.
It's not a negative thing. The issue, it's a great thing, especially when your body becomes more efficient at utilizing it for exercise. And this is particularly important for higher intensities when your body's creating more lactate as a byproduct of the work. And what we see in this 8 to 12 week period is athletes tend to be able to run at a little bit higher intensity because their body's ability to utilize lactate as an energy source is improved. So less lactate is kind of ending up in the muscles, and more is ending up back into the system and used as energy. And really, like, the misconception there is like, oh, my legs are burning and all this, and they think that's lactate, but it's really not. Like, lactate is an energy source. It's a very positive thing. We just want to train to be able to use it efficiently, because when we have too much lactate in our blood as a result of not being efficient at using it, that's when our body forces us to slow down.
Right. Cool.
Because there's a misalignment, a balance there, pH balance there that's going to force you to slow down, essentially.
Right. So this is, this 8 to 12 week period is also when oxygen uptake improves, and so does the proportion of type 1 or slow twitch muscle fibers start to improve as well to facilitate better endurance running.
That's right. Those are the good ones. Those are the muscle fiber types that have more endurance. They don't they don't tire out as easily.
Right.
And consistent running obviously has an impact on all of this. It really helps to also have a focused training plan that targets the specific physiology here that we're trying to improve. If we're only working on one type of physiology, for example, if we're only doing easy running all the time, and then we're only working on those adaptations,
ultra runner syndrome,
right? We're really lowering the ceiling of what that athlete's endurance capabilities really are.
Right.
So we need to work on all these systems.
Right. And one of the cool things, like thing I see athletes run into a lot is they're like, oh, did I do this workout right? And I tend to really want people to understand that you can, even though we will be targeting specific energy systems in a workout like VO2 max or like lactate threshold, you can't ever just single one energy system out, right? Like these things don't work in isolation. You're always using your aerobic system, right? If you're doing an interval workout, you're going to necessarily like there will be some lactate shuttling going on. So it's not like you can just like turn a dial to go just VO2 max, just lactate threshold, just aerobic. These things like there's overlap and there's nuance and there's balance between all of them. So the only way to really do a workout wrong is to put yourself in a hole that you can't recover from.
Excuse me. Bit of a burp there, but you're right.
Burping in agreement.
And I think like if we look at like having a cup, and when we fill the cup to the top of that cup is like where our VO2 max would be.
Right.
And then somewhere just below that would be lactate threshold. And then the rest would be, that's kind of the gray area of Z3. And then zone 2 and below would be the majority of that.
Right.
And so, the bigger the cup is, the higher we can kind of push that VO2 max, then the higher your threshold effort can be, and then the greater your overall capacity is. So a lot of the issues with ultra runners is they don't do any speed work, they don't do any VO2 max work, they don't do specific lactate threshold work, or threshold work as we might call it in shorthand, and therefore but they do a lot of easy running.
Right.
So their aerobic zone is big, but their overall potential is very small because they haven't worked on any of those other systems.
So like their floor might be raised slowly over time, but their ceiling sure isn't going anywhere if they're not continuing to sort of push the limits on their VO2 max and lactate threshold.
Right. And like we talked a lot about looking at the bear, La La Land, we rise to where our ceiling is.
Right. And like you always got to be polishing that silverware. But if you're not also learning how to like serve caviar every so often, you're really neglecting sort of the tip of the spear there. So why do we train for more than 12 weeks then, right? Like what adaptations continue to occur past that sort of like 12-week time frame here?
Well, all of these adaptations accumulate over time. So we've all got that going for us, but the stuff that happens on the largest time scales, months to years, are our structural or musculoskeletal adaptations. Muscles, ligaments, tendons, connective tissues, all of that stuff takes a lot longer to become stronger and more resilient to injury. And I would say, if you haven't been running for at least 4 years, you have work to do in the durability department.
Yeah, because like your injury risk is just going to be significantly higher, particularly with soft tissue and bone injuries.
That's correct. And this is the kind of stuff that when we're overdoing it in training, we're continuing to raise the volume too quickly or raise the intensity too quickly because we think there's a misperception that we think if we do those things quickly and keep raising the volume, keep raising the intensity, that's going to allow all of the other adaptations that we talked about that are integral in becoming a fitter, faster athlete, that's going to help those things happen quicker. But the reality is that only is going to lead to injury, and that doesn't help shortcut the process. And this is something that like athletes who are uncoached really, really struggle with. And often they get injured over and over again because they're stuck in these cycles, and they don't really understand that like, it's okay to repeat the same workout over and over. It's okay to not increase your long run every single week. Like it's okay for your volume to be similar year after year. And but obviously over that time, maybe some of the peaks are higher, but it takes a lot of time to find the sweet spot, which
Gotta
is
polish
again,
that silverware.
Right. And again, why I'm going to advocate for coaching, because when you have someone who's helping you find that sweet spot, where you're getting the adaptations, but you're not over risking for injury, where you're doing enough to stress your structural system, your musculoskeletal system, enough to help that adapt, but not so much that you overtrain and you end up with an injury. That's really where you get into the area of like, okay, I'm starting to flirt and push potential, because this is a lot. There's a lot that goes into this. So, I think it's really important to also recognize that our mental growth takes place on these longer time scales too. we're developing habits, we're developing routines around all this stuff. And so then we become much more resilient as a result of that. Um, and so that mental growth really can't be understated. It's a huge part of this process, and it accumulates over time. Um,
And this is also like a reason, like, sometimes we'll bring athletes onto the team and they're like, oh, I've had a like they have like an injury story. Like, I can't do this or I'll get injured. Like, I can't run more than this many miles a week or I'll get injured. Or I could never do an ultra, I'll get injured. And that's where like continuing to compound these adaptations over time with running consistently and healthily at an appropriate intensity level for you and your development, you can break out of those injury cycles, right? Like, just because you've had shin splints in the past, with correct training, that can be an issue that you don't encounter again if you approach training consistently, intelligently, and strategically. So that's one of the reasons that, again, we really stress like this consistent training over the course of like on the micro cycle of a year and then over years and years. Is that, a lot of times we just see people get stuck in that, like, oh, I have an injury, so I take 6 weeks off and then I sign up for a race. So I have to cram for the race. I race, I get injured, then I have to take another 6 weeks off. And training, just having that more consistent foundation literally changes your bone tissue. It changes your soft tissue composition as well, so that you become more resilient to injury over time.
yeah, exactly. And this is just why like I exist in the world, because I want everyone to know that this process is easier if you have people helping you in it.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
having a coach is the number one way to do this. If it's really hard to do this on your own. I tried to do it on my own for a long time and ended up in a lot of these situations. Um, Adaptations are the direct product of dedicated work,
Mm.
persistence, consistency, and purposeful rest. There's absolutely no substitute on this planet for any of those
There's not a
things.
pill. There's not a cream.
There is not. And I think it's so important. Like we gave some timelines in here, but every athlete is going to adapt in their own time based on their own individual physiology. Like, these are really, I would say, these time scales are really broad. I've worked with athletes who adapt super quickly and then plateau fast. I work with athletes who, take a long time to adapt and to feel better on easy runs. And then all of a sudden they have a rate of accelerated growth where they're like really crushing it after, almost a year of grinding. And so like all of this stuff really happens on different time scales for everybody. Like, this is these time scales are really, really broad strokes in my personal opinion.
Yeah. So let's circle back to some of the pitfalls or the red flags that we're looking for. What can athletes do if they feel impatient or frustrated by these long time scales? Like, a year can feel like a long time.
Can it? Yeah, it absolutely can. And I think
That's 7 years in Bowie years.
1 year, that's just like a week in my life. Um, I think that zooming out is something that really helps.
Mm.
So if you're feeling impatient, frustrated, like things aren't happening fast enough, you have to zoom out to understand that like the work pays off over time and you will be rewarded for that work. Like everything we talk about, the races that Zoe and I have done where we've achieved awesome things, that our athletes have achieved awesome things, those are not the product of a 3 month uh, cookie cutter training plan that was found off the internet. Like, that's the product of individualized coaching over at least a year, if not more, in most circumstances.
And we even have, like, I think there's a special Slack channel for our athletes, the 500 Club, for folks that have been training for 500 plus days. But we could also have like a 1500 day or a 2K club, because the most successful folks are the folks that know that 2K is when you're just getting started.
So I would recommend, pick up the Tao, pick up any book that's going to help promote that mastery like approach. Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance. Like, there
Yeah.
are so many different, like there's a lot of different literature on where we can approach that topic from a different place, but we have to kind of get in that mindset of like, we got to polish the silverware.
So, can you walk me through the role of recovery in this process as well? How does recovery influence sort of the timescale of adaptations here?
Well, I mean, purposeful recovery is kind of the gateway for the adaptation process, because if it's all stress all the time, we end up in areas of unproductive stress, and we need to keep stress productive. And in order to do that, we have to recharge both physically and mentally. And so really the adaptation process happens like between the workouts. The workouts create the stress that can then have the potential to create adaptation and growth. But
Mm,
until you're in that rest state, nothing's really happening there. So that's the reason why you need to have rest built into your plan. And for some athletes, like, rest looks different. Like
yeah.
for an elite marathoner, a rest day could be a 5 mile jog at a very, very easy effort. Or, rest day could be like taking a day off after every big workout. It could
Yeah.
be taking 2 days off a week. Like, it looks different for everybody, but in a successful plan, there is always rest built in. Sometimes there's down weeks built in, if an athlete has a history of injury. But the point is that you really have to take those rest days seriously. And it's really important to make sure that like what you're doing on those rest days isn't actually like kind of training.
Right.
So like doing like a long bike ride, oh, this isn't doing anything. Well, you're not really resting. Like, oh, I'm gonna go on a jog. Well, that's not resting. Like, I'll go on a long hike with my friends. Okay, like, is it an hour long hike? How easy are you going? How high is your heart rate? Like, what you're
Yeah.
doing really does matter on
Right.
those
And the
days.
best way to support your adaptations is to make sure that you're really creating the circumstances where those adaptations can happen, right? Which is like productive rest, right? Like you only move forward on the days where maybe physically you're sitting pretty still, right? Like that's when your bone actually, like the breakdowns that occur in training, the bone is a dynamic tissue. It can heal itself. Likewise, soft tissues, those micro tears start to repair themselves and you build back stronger. Similarly, that's when it becomes super, super important to make sure that you're fueling effectively and that you have energy available in order for your body to adapt. So oftentimes when I see athletes who are feeling like they're not progressing as fast as they want to, it's because they're not resting as intentionally as they should be, and they're not fueling adequately to provoke the adaptations they want.
Yeah, and fuel, especially protein, actually
Protein.
plays a huge role in all the adaptations that we discussed today.
Yeah.
Um, and I would say, just maybe to close out this part of the conversation, and to circle back to where we started, I think overall the greatest difficulty that we have as coaches is in helping athletes understand these time scales, because the goals are often so alluring to us, and we really want, we love the idea of achieving.
Yeah.
So, and this is, just baked into the psychology of being a person. But the fact of the matter is that if you want to succeed in this sport, you have to really choose goals that are the proper fit for where you are in the process. And that doesn't mean let go of your dreams. That means, make sure you have the appropriate goals and timeline that help you build in a safe and healthy way to those dreams. Because the ideal is you get to that first 100 miler, and not only is your structural system ready, but also, physiologically, you have all of those great adaptations to support the effort. But then afterwards, that effort won't be so much that you're couch bound for weeks and months after, because you overstressed yourself. And like, these things are so stressful anyways, that there's always a high degree of that. But a big indication for me as a coach and an athlete who's jumping up in a distance, if they're ready or not, is often going to come after the race, because we're also mentally strong already. We're going to go out there, we're going to gut it out, we're going to get it done. But then how broken down is your body after that? That's
Right.
really going to indicate whether or not you're ready for that. And so I really try to steer athletes away from that, because that's less time training, less time doing the things that you love, and to really stretch those time scales out.
Yeah, think of yourself like the bear. If you thought season 1 was good, just wait till you see what's in season 2, season 3, and beyond.
Yeah, and just, I don't just, if you're curious, if you're having like if you've got a question about this in your own training, I would be happy to answer this question, a question
Yeah.
for you.
It's
Just,
about time we did like an AMA episode again.
yeah. Yeah. And, oh man, like I'm reflecting on how many athletes I've had have successful races this year, and how many of them I've seen them overload themselves after the race with like trying to do something too close to the race. So,
Right.
for example, like I just ran 40 miles in 2 weeks after I want to do a 20 miler. And I'm like, probably a bad idea. Or, I want to do a 50-mile race 4 weeks before my 100. Probably a bad idea. Like these are the kind of things that like our minds are like attracted to because they're big and they're epic, but they're often the kind of stuff that like is
You're
really the opposite
yeah,
of polishing the forks.
yeah, and your bone tissue might have a really different opinion about how fun that sounds.
Well, it's most likely going to, unless we've got a history of you doing stuff like that and recovering really well and quickly to work with.
Right. And again, like again, the reason that people have success working with coaches is so many of these timelines are really individualized. It really matters like the context of your life stress, the context of your nutrition, your recovery, like your like all of these things are a factor in, and that's why it's really important that you work with someone who's willing to get to know and understand those sides of you and bring that to the table and crafting the plan that is going to optimize your timeline for adaptations.
Hell yeah. Great closing. Well, thanks, guys.
That was
I
fun.
hope you got something out of that. I know I did. It's always great to refresh on these topics and to talk about them. It keeps them more present in the front of my mind where I feel like they should be as a coach.
Yeah.
If you have feedback or question for a future call, you know how to reach us. Microcosm-coaching.com. Contact us at microcosmcoaching@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you guys, and thanks so much for joining us.